music stops.
Hey out there, this is September 19th, 2015, and it's about 10 minutes or so past 10 in the morning here in Northern California. And today I wanted to get into world events and discuss the people that are really running the planet, and by that I mean running human life, running the policies, creating the policies that human beings all have to live under collectively and individually, of course. And this is basically an unrelenting, rapacious, merciless gaggle of thugs, okay? In a nutshell, you could really sum these people up like that. And the methods they use to maintain control is primarily through the monetary system. And beyond that, if that should ever fail, which it has repeatedly in history when the people caught on, when not only just the common people caught on, but when leaders caught on. People like Andrew Jackson understood the bankers, people like JFK, and many others. Even today, contemporarily speaking, guys like Ron Paul understand the nature of money printing. And they understand the difference between sound currency and unsound currency. And while those might sound like innocent talking points to a lot of people, it's critical, imperative, crucial to understand why it's so important that our overlords, this illegitimate gaggle of rapacious thugs, again, why they must maintain an unsound economic system. And it's very important to understand and distinguish between true capitalism and what's going on, what's being done under the guise, under the pretense of capitalism. And I'd like to point out that the difference between unsound currency and sound currency is that one currency is stable and one is not. And of course you can guess which one is which. So in order to attain sound currency, there's just a few fundamental facets, components that need to be in place and need to be adhered to in a very diligent manner, you could say strict manner. And those components are checks and balances and accountability. And it comes down to labeling an economic system capitalist. If you're going to label an economic system capitalistic, then it's very important that you've got an understanding of capitalism fundamentally and what components comprise capitalism. And a couple of the fundamental components that comprise capitalism are risk. It's very important to understand this about capitalism, is that risk is involved. That in other words, if you do something that's not prudent, that could be called foolish, and you overextend your capital and you invest in things that you ought not to have invested in, that were short-sighted, nearsighted, then you, by the law of capitalism, are to fail. That is the natural law. That is the protocol. That's the order of business. That's what must be done. You must fail. And then somebody else that invested more prudently, well, they will succeed. Now, when it comes to competition, that's another facet. And you're constantly competing in a world that's evolving, that's changing. Technology is changing. Methods to produce our needs are changing. Methods to produce our wants are changing. And this is where supply and demand enters in. In order to have this capitalist system, now you've got risk, you've got competition, and you've got supply and demand, and all these are interconnected. And of course, you've got to have checks and balances as a watchdog. You've got to have accountability, in other words. So when capitalism is working correctly and you're adhering to the law of supply and demand, what naturally happens is a state of prosperity. And it's not a state of prosperity that's confined to a few, to those that initially invested capital, but that state of prosperity is shared in a rising tide of prosperity. And the way this is done is through collectively, as a civilization, as a society, on a microcosmic level, as a community, you find easier and easier methods to produce not only the things you need, which is the most fundamentally important thing to do, right? You need food, shelter, and clean water. But beyond that, the things that we want and crave. So that's the trinkets and knickknacks, the luxury items, and whatnot, recreational items, things to entertain us, and just ingenuity, inventiveness, and all the aspects of the human nature, that this is very natural to us to produce and innovate and invent. So, this is why we have, all the computer age here with the smartphones. And I mean, you can get a computer on your wristwatch now. This is why we can send spaceships up into space and explore. This, you could say, well, this is in the name of science, but this is also in the name of curiosity. This is something you do for fun. It's just like why you might decide to learn a new sport, for example. You might say, well, I want to see this surfing thing, looks pretty fun. I want to see for myself if it's really fun. You're curious. So you go and you research this for yourself firsthand, and you say, indeed, this is fun, and so you go out and surf and have a great time, and then you tell other people this is the greatest thing in the world. But unfortunately, you take surfing, for example, it's got its own problems. I mean, and take Southern California, for example. It's so territorial with the few waves that come in and the huge population of people that want to surf. People are getting beat up down there. They've had to put undercover cops out in some areas because of this rowdiness, this territorialism, this possessiveness. And there's a simple solution to that, There's solutions to everything. And this is something this illegitimate gaggle of merciless, rapacious thugs don't want you to understand. And the solution is quite simply to install artificial reefs to satisfy the needs of every surfer on Earth and then some. I mean, everybody could have their own perfect surf break. That's the reality of what we could have with what we know. And of course, such a thing would increase the amount of fish, because anytime you manufacture a reef, it encourages the fish, and so you understand how all this is beneficial. These reefs could be marked. I mean, we're not talking about reefs out in the ocean that ships have to worry about hitting. We're talking about reefs close in where the waves will break. They could even be sliding reefs to be adjusted for the size of the swell. It could all be done scientifically to produce all the waves we could ever want, perfect waves at that. And different people want different waves, so you could adjust everything accordingly. So anyhow, I think it's important. It seems like I kind of regressed. I backtracked there a little bit, but you know something? It's all connected. It's so important that all of us understand that what we call reality is nothing more than an invention by the people that are running our lives. The only time you can get a glimpse of true reality, not this unreality, anti-reality, substitute for reality that they've given us, is through turning to your cosmic roots, all of us. Understand that while your parents can be commended for raising you, if they did a good job, or at least if they tried to do a good job in raising you, they may be commended for that. Even if they fail, they are worthy of honor, like the Ten Commandments say. I'll digress a little bit here. But in order to understand what I mean when I talk about how, the new commandments is to love God above all else, love one another yourselves, and like Jesus said, the law and the prophets are summed up in that. So this fulfills the Ten Commandments. Because when you think about it, if you're living by the golden rule and treating others the way you want to be treated, loving others in the way that God loves us, then all the other commandments will fall into place. When we think about the Ten Commandments, we can think about, I think there's 3 of them that say, do not covet, do not covet your neighbor's wife and his possessions, and on and on. And then what are the others? Do not bear false testimony, do not have any gods before God, do not worship false idols, do not commit adultery, do not steal, do not murder or kill. There's a lot of commandments there, but you understand that all of these, every single 10 commandment would fall into place if we just adhered to those 2 simple commandments. And remember, a commandment is not like it's coming from God, you do this or else, It's a roadmap. You do this for your own good, okay? For the good of your children, for the good of your brothers and sisters, you do this thing, And if you do it, then you will find happiness. And after all, at the end of the day, isn't that what it's all about, is attaining true happiness as opposed to pseudo-happiness is what's being peddled upon us by these unreality pimps, essentially, is what they are. And they've got themselves in a corner, the wise, they're not really wise, they're evil genius. The wise ones knew was coming all along. They know, for example, Ponzi schemes can't work. They know that the love of money is the root of all evil, and they choose that path. They choose, the reason they stay in control is because they choose to be evil. They choose to do the things that are barred. They are taboo from decent, upright people doing. For example, committing murder. These people will live outside the bounds of the golden rule willingly. And that's how they rule our lives. They're willing to commit murder. They're willing to do things like the assassination of JFK. And this is what people want to understand, a little history of America. I was 5 years old when JFK was murdered. This was a money printer's coup d'etat. I have no doubts about it. Some people say, oh, well, it had to do with, the Gulf of Tonkin, and he didn't want to go into Indochina and start wars and all. Whatever, that's fine. To me, that's minutia compared to the money printing privilege, okay? The issuance of currency by we the people as opposed to we the monsters, okay? This is what happened. So you want to understand what happened and what these people are willing to do to get their way. Like spoiled little vicious, virulent, venomous brats, okay? That's what these people are. And they will go down. And it's in God's time, though. It's not in human time. But that day is coming. And anybody that wants to skirt that reality is missing a great point of encouragement and comfort to know that good will prevail, that love is stronger than hate, and this is a good reason to love your enemy, and that good is stronger than bad, okay? And that at the end of the day, after, this whole thing plays itself out, again, in God's time, not in ours, then we'll see what's going to happen here. So it's very comforting and encouraging to understand the true end game, the big picture. Now, just to finish up, I was talking about how, you want to turn to God to get a glimpse of true reality. The only hope we have is to turn to God. It's not to our parents because they're fallible. I brought my kids up believing this, and they've turned out I couldn't ask for better kids. I've told them I'm just their illegitimate dad, okay? What I did, monkeys do and dogs do, okay? Yes, I stood by them and I protected them. I looked after them. I raised them, okay? But you know what? At the end of the day, they are a cosmic gift from above. And I see them as that. I thank God every day I've had to have these two wonderful daughters. Of course, I had a son, and he died of sudden infant death at 2 weeks. So, you know, this is probably, he was likely vaccinated with his hepatitis V shot day one, hepatitis B shot on day one, which a lot of people will say that's too soon, and you know it can cause serious problems, particularly for boys. So SIDS does happen more to boys than girls because the blood-brain barrier in boys